I still remember the vibration of my phone that morning. A simple text message, only 12 words long. Yet it shattered me more than 1,000 storms ever could. Dad, you're not coming with us. My husband thinks it's best if you stay behind. For a few seconds I just stared at the screen, numb. Was it a joke? A mistake? We were supposed to leave together. I'd packed, paid, and even cleaned the car the night before. It was meant to be a family trip, my first real outing since my wife passed away. But instead, that text felt like a knife twisting slowly in my chest. I called her. No answer. I texted. Nothing. And when I looked out the window, I saw it. Their car, driving off. My daughter sitting in the passenger seat, avoiding my gaze. Her husband, smirking behind the wheel. That was the day my heart broke. But it was also the day something darker was born inside me. She thought she could leave me behind. But I would make sure they never forgot the man they betrayed. I wasn't always this lonely old man sitting in silence, staring at empty rooms. Once I was a father with purpose, a husband with dreams, a man who thought love was enough to hold a family together. I met my wife, Margaret, when I was just 25. She had the kind of laugh that could fill a whole room, and when she smiled, even bad days felt worth it. Together, we built everything. A small home, a little business, and a life full of simple joys. When our daughter Emily was born, I remember holding her in my arms and promising her one thing. You'll never have to face this world alone. And I kept that promise, for as long as I could. I worked long hours in construction, sunburnt hands, aching back. But I never complained. Every time my paycheck came in, it went toward Emily's needs. School shoes, birthday gifts, her favorite strawberry ice cream on Sundays. Sometimes I'd skip meals so she could go on her school trips. Other times, I'd mend old clothes instead of buying new ones. When Margaret fell ill, I spent every night by her hospital bed, whispering that everything would be okay, even when I knew it wasn't. The night she passed away, Emily was in college. I remember calling her, my voice breaking, saying, "She's gone, sweetheart." After that, the house felt too big, too quiet. Still, I kept going, because I had Emily. I poured my grief into helping her finish college. When she graduated, I was the loudest one clapping, tears running down my face. I didn't care that my suit was old, or that people stared. I was just proud. When she brought Ryan home for the first time, I saw the sparkle in her eyes. I could tell she loved him, so I welcomed him with open arms. I told myself, if he makes her happy, that's all that matters. He started calling me Dad right away, and I liked that. It felt nice to have a son. After their wedding, they struggled with money. Our rent was high, jobs were uncertain. So, without a second thought, I told them to move in with me. I gave them the master bedroom, the same one where Margaret and I once slept, and moved into the small room down the hall. I cooked for them, fixed what was broken, paid the bills. Ryan often promised, "We'll pay you back soon, Dad." But I never wanted repayment. All I wanted was family around me again. Some evenings, we'd have dinner together, and I'd feel almost whole again. Emily would laugh, and for a moment it felt like old times, the kind of warmth that keeps an old man going. I thought I had finally rebuilt something worth living for. I thought I had a daughter who loved me as much as I loved her. But looking back now, those peaceful nights were only the calm before the storm. I remember the morning like it was a bruise. Bright light, the smell of coffee gone cold, and my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. I didn't expect a dagger. I expected a plan, a laugh, a last-minute change. Instead, 12 words blinked up at me, and the room tilted. "Dad, you're not coming with us. My husband thinks it's best if you stay behind." For a long minute I only read it again and again, as if repetition could make it kinder. My hands went numb. The mug slipped and clattered against the sink. I called her before my mind could catch up. No answer. I texted, "Why?" 3 letters that felt embarrassingly small. No reply. I walked outside because I needed air, and I saw their car at the curb, suitcases on the trunk, a picnic basket in the back. Emily sat there, fiddling with her phone, not meeting my eyes. Ryan was running his hand through his hair, smiling that way he does when he thinks he's winning. They put the car in gear and drove away like it was nothing, like I was a chair they'd left behind. Shock was the first thing, a cold, brittle shock that left me incapable of thinking. Then the sadness came, slow as rain, soaking into every room I had once filled with laughter. I felt ridiculous for being surprised. I had seen it coming in whispers and glances, but seeing it made it real in a way whispers never could. The betrayal didn't arrive whole, it unrolled like a rotten ribbon. Weeks before, Ryan had sighed loudly when I mentioned chores. "Dad, you don't have to do that," he'd say, as if my help was an insult. Emily started offering. Maybe Dad would be happier in a smaller place. Soft, polite, poison. One night, I overheard them, the kind of thing you don't expect to hear in your own home. "Ryan, he's holding us back. The house is in his name, but it's useless if he's going to be in the way." "Emily, you're being harsh." "Ryan, this is practical. Think of what we could do. Move, invest, start fresh." My stomach fell through my chest. They spoke of selling the house with the same ease they spoke of the weather. They didn't see me as the person who had raised Emily, who had slept on the couch to make sure the heating stayed on. To them, I was a line on a ledger. Expense, liability, something to be minimized. When I confronted them, my voice shook, and their faces were trained in the expression of mild annoyance. Me. "You can't just... This is my home." "Ryan, it's better for everyone, Dad. We're thinking about our future." "Emily, please don't make this harder than it has to be." They wrapped the knife in concern and called it compassion. They called me dramatic when I cried. They told me I was imagining things when I asked about the deeds. I felt gaslighted in a house I had built with my hands and paid the mortgage on for decades. They painted me as a selfish old man who couldn't see what was best for the family. Humiliation crept in, like a slow-burning shame. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact when they saw me on the porch. When I asked Ryan about repaying the bills he'd promised to share, he said, "Dad, we'll handle it." And then he didn't. Mail piled up with notices I couldn't quite understand because no one had thought to explain. The worst was the picnic photos I saw a week later. Bright, laughing faces on social media. Emily's smile wide and radiant. Ryan with his arm possessively around her. They had left me behind with my suitcase packed and my heart in my throat. And then they showed the world how happy they were without me. I sat on the edge of my bed and watched their vacation roll through my phone like someone else's life. Every small kindness I'd done, the sleepless nights when Emily was sick, the tuition checks, the day I gave up the back room to them, all of it was erased in the space of a text. It burned, not just because they left, but because they had learned to dismiss me so easily. Disbelief curdled into anger, a slow, dangerous heat pooling behind my ribs. I replayed their words over and over, trying to find where I had failed. But failure wasn't the point. Convenience was. They had chosen comfort over memory, convenience over gratitude. When Ryan said, "We need to think about ourselves now," it landed like a verdict. The final insult was practical and bureaucratic. Days later they told me with casual smiles that they'd found us a smaller place, an apartment downtown, close to shops, they said, friendly-like. Emily's voice was soft but resolute. "This will be better for you, Dad. You'll meet people. It's time." It was kindness on the surface, a velvet glove over a steel hammer. They packed my things with efficiency, as if sorting out clutter, not memories. As they closed the door, Ryan said, "We'll help you get settled," and I wanted to punch him, to tell him to stop pretending. Emily's eyes flicked away when I looked at her. There was a new shame in her face. Or maybe it was guilt. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." But it was the kind of sorry that lead us. Eve's stains. In the silence that followed their leaving, the house swallowed me whole. Every room echoed with the absence of their voices. Every photograph seemed to glare with accusation. My hands shook not from age, but from the force of being betrayed by the people I had sacrificed everything for. Anger came at last, sharp and clarifying. It wasn't the noisy rage of a man losing his temper. It was a cold, steady furnace that lit inside me and made my thinking clear. I could feel the shape of something forming, a refusal to be dismissed, a plan that would not let this hurt stand unreturned. I sat at the kitchen table, the text still glowing on my phone, and I promised myself I would not be the quiet old man in their story anymore. The betrayal had pierced me, but it had also woken something that had been sleeping for too long. And as the house settled into its new, unwelcome quiet, I began to imagine the first moves of a retaliation they would never see coming. I remember the exact sound of the tent flap that night, a tiny, mundane noise that somehow felt like thunder in my chest. We were supposed to be on a family camping trip. Instead, I sat on a folding chair with a mug of cold coffee and the text still burning on my screen. The stars were out, indifferent and scattered, as if the sky had not a care for what people did to one another. For a long time, I just watched them, feeling smaller than a single mote of dust. Grief had been a constant companion after Margaret died, a heavy blanket I wore every morning. But this was different. This was sharp, deliberate, like someone had cut the blanket into strips and used them to tie my hands. I thought about all the nights I'd sat up with a feverish child, the mornings I woke early to fix a breakfast she liked, the years of overtime so she could have a better life. Did those years mean nothing now? Was my love simply an expense to be trimmed? I felt the old familiar shame of not being enough, of being an outdated weight, and it threatened to swallow me. But then a memory surfaced, bright and stubborn, in Margaret's hands, freckled and warm, squeezing mine the night she whispered, "Stand tall, love." Her voice cut through the fog. Stand tall. I realized grief had made me passive, had taught me to accept losses as if they were inevitable. And in that moment, I hated that part of myself more than I hated them. My inner monologue was a messy, urgent thing. You gave everything. You stayed. You protected. You were not a burden. You were a foundation. How many times had I bent so they could stand tall? How many quiet sacrifices had I made so their lives looked effortless? If I stayed silent now, it would be the final erasure of a life lived for others. No, not this. Not ever. I stood up, the chair scraping loud against the gravel like an alarm. The cold night air hit my face and woke up a clarity that had been asleep under years of softness. Anger arrived not as a shout, but as a clean, precise tool. It felt efficient. It felt honest. I felt my hands. They were steady. My breathing slowed. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts arranged themselves into plans instead of pleas. I replayed their words, their smiles, the way Emily had avoided my gaze when they drove off. Each image was a match. Each match added to the bonfire building inside me. I thought of the house, the mortgage, all the times I'd given up something small so they could have something bright. I thought of Ryan's smirk, of Emily's polite cruelty, and the heat in me hardened into something like steel. There was fear. Yes, the fear of being seen as petty or small. But it was overshadowed by a deeper fear, the fear that if I did nothing, I would wake up one day completely erased from the story I had written with my hands. That fear made me honest with myself. I would not let them reduce my life to a footnote. I began to list things in my head the way I used to list materials for a job, what I had, what they had, what they wanted. I thought about who I could call, the old lawyer who owed me a favor, the neighbors who remembered when Margaret's laugh filled the street. I thought about quiet moves, about patience, about using the very rules they thought would bury me against them. Not vengeance for the sake of cruelty, vengeance to reclaim what was mine, and to teach them the cost of throwing someone away. As the night deepened, each memory sharpened my resolve. I remembered Emily's first steps across this very lawn, the scraped knees I bandaged, the teeth I kissed, the science projects I stayed up late helping with. Those memories were not disposable. They were anchors. I wrapped them around my anger until the anger felt less like a monster and more like a purpose. I made small vows to myself, like quiet prayers. I will not beg. I will not be humiliated. I will act with patience and precision. I allowed myself a single, hot tear, then wiped it away. Tears were fine, but they would not be the end of the story. I would become the author of the next chapter. When dawn began to thin the edge of night, I stood by the tent and said the words out loud, as if saying them might weld them into reality. Enough, I said, and the word felt like a blade that cut whatever had kept me soft. Enough of being walked over. Enough of being the invisible safety net. I thought of how quiet I'd been, proud of my patience, of my forgiveness. That quiet had been mistaken for weakness. No more. No more invisible. No more used. I promised myself I would take back my dignity, my home, my name. I would make them remember the man who had taught Emily how to ride a bike and how to tell the truth. My vow came not as a scream, but as a cold, calm statement to the empty woods and to myself. They will not erase me. They will feel the weight of what they threw away. I would not be a cautionary tale of a man pushed aside. I would be the reckoning that taught them the price of betrayal. And with that, something in me closed, and something else opened. A path that it led away from grief and straight into a plan. I whispered the last words like a benediction and a promise. You left me behind. I will make sure you wish you hadn't. I started small, the way you build a fire when the night is cold. Careful, steady, with patience. First, I stopped reacting. I smiled at them when they looked my way. I answered texts as if nothing had happened. I let them think the old man was broken. Then I made a list. Everything. Names, dates, promises, unpaid bills, the nights I'd stayed up worrying. I wrote it by hand on a yellow legal pad and carried it like a map. I called Mr. Clark, my lawyer of 30 years, and asked him to lunch. His eyes softened when I told him the truth. He didn't ask for proof. He only said, "We'll make a plan." Next, I opened a new bank account, not my name, a trust in Margaret's memory. People underestimate what a well-placed trust can do. It buys time. It buys control. I hired a private investigator under the pretense of trying to find a family heirloom. He came back with details I already suspected: Ryan's secret debts, a shell company he'd set up, phone calls at odd hours. Every piece of information felt like a brick. I stacked them. I spoke quietly to neighbors who had watched our family grow. Their memories were more valuable than I'd thought. Anecdotes about Ryan's short temp jobs, Alenda's visits late at night. I dug through old paperwork in the attic, mortgages, tax papers, a deed I'd once signed but never fully transferred. There were loopholes there, thin as hair but stronger than I needed. I bought a burner phone and an email address no one would trace. I stopped using the house line for anything important. Secrecy becomes a habit, almost a comfort. With Mr. Clark, I drafted documents that looked ordinary on the surface: power of attorney forms, transfer agreements, a charitable trust proposal. I too told no one what the trust beneficiary would be. I let Ryan invite buyers to the house. He wanted a quick sale. Greed makes people careless. I watched him rehearse his smile in the mirror and felt nothing but cold patience. At night I sat with my files under a lamp and practiced calm. I recorded conversations, legally, in my state, whenever Ryan promised repayment and never kept it. The recordings were raw, unmistakable. I used small favors to build allies. I fixed the landlord's leaking roof. I returned a lost dog to a woman who turned out to be connected to a local bank manager. Small debts of gratitude matter. I prepared contingencies. If the sale went through, I had emergency motions ready with Mr. Clark. If they tried to forge signatures, the investigator had photographs. If they lied, the truth waited in my folder like a coiled spring. I made sure my paperwork was idiot-proof, notarized, time-stamped, witnessed by people who'd seen my marriage certificate, people who remembered holding Emily as a baby. I practiced patience as if it were a muscle. Some nights I felt ridiculous, whispering plans into the dark like a conspirator. Other nights, I slept like a man who had finally remembered his own backbone. I fed small breadcrumbs to the right ears, an offhand comment to a real estate agent about unpaid taxes, a question to the tax office that led to a frozen account. I watched the ripple begin. I didn't rely entirely on law and paper. I used public truth, too. A few well-placed calls to the county clerk made sure any transfer would pull a search trail long enough to trip an unsuspecting hand. I learned to be invisible when they were loud. I let Ryan boast about his plans while I booked meetings with the people who could stop him, quietly, calmly. There were moments I almost slipped. I wanted to storm into the kitchen and tell Emily everything, to hurl the files on the table and make them see. But rage is a poet or architect. Patience builds the house. Anger burns it down. I planted a story with a neighbor that suggested the house might be turned into something public. That gossip reached a buyer who suddenly got cold feet. Perfect. I made sure the trust deed cited Margaret's name and community use. A shelter, a program for elderly fishermen like her father had been. Emotional language ties, legal knots. As each little element fell into place, I retreated into quiet. I ate alone at the table, reading newspapers, letting the plan mature like a patient harvest. Sometimes I rehearsed the reveal in my head, the look on their faces when the rug was pulled. I never imagined violence. I imagined exposure, accountability, the truth set plainly in front of them. Still, I kept secrets from even Mr. Clark. There were methods I would reveal only when the time came, contingencies I thought they might not expect. I told myself not to rush. Revenge that arrives too fast tastes of impulsiveness. The best kind is slow and certain. Neighbors who'd once avoided me now offered small courtesies. They hadn't known I'd been collecting their goodwill like currency. On the night before my move, I made one last quiet phone call to an old friend in the county records office. The line was brief. He promised to look out for anomalies. He promised nothing public. He promised what counted, discretion. By then, the plan looked less like a list and more like a living thing, patient, hungry, and inevitable. I'd stopped asking myself whether I should do it. I only asked how to do it right. They saw a frail man with a suitcase. They didn't see the ledger of favors, the notarized papers, the legal counsel, the investigator's folder, or the trust that would swallow their plans. And still, even with so many pieces in place, there was one move I kept to myself, the final dropstone that would make all the other pieces fall. I smiled sometimes when they boasted. Let them believe they'd already won. Let them sleep easy. The real work was done in the dark. I wasn't yet ready to show them the last card, not until the moment was perfect. They'll wake up one morning and find that the map they thought they drew leads them nowhere. What I planned next would make them understand not just loss, but consequence. I told myself the day had to look ordinary, so I arranged everything to be painfully, perfectly normal. Ryan swaggered in with his tie crooked, already practicing the victory grin. Ryan: "Dad, just sign here. It's all straightforward. Cash in a week." I nodded and reached for the pen like I was the old man they thought I was, calm, trusting, ready to be tossed aside. The buyer arrived on time. A sleek car, a clipboard, polite questions. Ryan beamed. He thought the sale was sealed. But the man with the clipboard was the private investigator in a suit. The cash they waved was a formal notice of inquiry from a bank manager I'd quietly spoken to. Ryan's smile faltered when the manager asked, "Can you explain these liens and that unusual shell company?" he stammered. I watched the color drain from his face and felt the first sweet cut of triumph. I signed the paper Ryan handed me, my hand steady as stone. He didn't notice the fine print, the transfer clause Mr. Clark had drafted in Margaret's name, the clause with language about community use and irrevocability. "Just sign here," he said with that practiced charm. He didn't see the notary waiting, the witnesses I'd arranged, the recorded affirmation that would stand in court. When Ryan tried to pull the bag of actual cash out of his pocket to bribe the buyer set it down and smiled sadly. Buyer, softly. "Mr. Carter, we can't proceed until these liens are cleared." There it was. The first domino. The bank had been tipped. The buyer walked away politely, leaving Ryan's grin snapped in half. Then the investigator quietly handed a folder to Mr. Clay. "Auric, photos of Ryan signing in a cafe, receipts for late-night transfers, a list of payments to an anonymous account." I could see panic crawl up Ryan's neck like a living thing. He lunged for the folder and I stayed cool because I had everything backed up. Copies, recordings, witnesses. He tried to accuse me of entrapment, of lying. His voice grew loud and ugly. The neighbors in the street looked in. Shame began to circle him like a vulture. When he went for the deed, the one he thought he could forge, I had already submitted a preemptive motion. Mr. Clark handed the clerk the trust document and the clerk read it aloud. Margaret's name, her wishes, the house to be used for community shelter and elder aid. The words hung in the air, heavy as judgment. Ryan's face collapsed. He realized the house wasn't just out of reach, it was legally inaccessible to him now. Emily tried to pull him away, her voice sharp, defensive at first. "Dad, you can't. This isn't fair." I reached into my coat and played the recording I'd kept. Ryan promising to take care of the bills and laughing about getting the old man to sign away the deed. Her face was a study in horror as his words played, as her best friend's laugh from a secret call. "Don't worry, I'll handle the papers," echoed in the room. The twist I hadn't expected was how quickly the small town turned. A local reporter who'd been tipped off by a neighbor showed up, not with a camera for a scandal, but with a microphone for the truth. He'd heard about the strange buyers and the frozen accounts, and when he learned who the house was being turned over to, he wanted to cover the shelter's opening. Public light can be a crucible. It was mine. Ryan tried to smear me. "He's manipulating public opinion," he spat. But I had Mr. Clark, the investigator, the bank manager, and a pile of notarized documents that not only proved the trust, but also proved Ryan's attempts to hide debt and use forged initials. When the county clerk handed Ryan a copy of the official record, his name scratched out where he'd planned to sign forged initials, he whirled on me, rage like an animal. He lunged for the papers. I let him. The police, called by a neighbor I'd quietly told what to expect, stepped in before anything worse could happen. They dusted the table for fingerprints and found what the investigator had suspected: attempts at forging, a series of false initials traced in the margins of the mock transfer Ryan had prepared. The officer's face was clinical. The words "fraud investigation" hit Ryan harder than anything I'd done. He looked at Emily with pleading eyes then, raw, unvarnished, the mask finally cracked. "I didn't think it would go this far," he whispered. No excuse could cover the evidence. Emily's betrayal flickered, then melted into something that wasn't defense, but dawning shame. She stood in the doorway, hands trembling, watching her husband be led to an officer's car. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. I had wanted justice, not spectacle. But the look in her eyes, the weight of her realization that she had helped orchestrate this, was its own punishment. As the story spread, phone calls came from people I hadn't seen in years. Old co-workers, neighbors, a woman who remembered when Margaret taught at the local school. They offered statements. They offered to testify to the life we'd built and the truth of what had happened. Community testimony became a second blade. Ryan's colleagues began to distance themselves. The shell company's accountant refused to sign off. The bank froze accounts until the investigation cleared up the mess. His options narrowed like a wasteland. In the days that followed, small but crucial victories arrived. The buyer's earnest money was returned. A county grant application for the shelter was approved because of the public support. Otis Ryan received a formal notice from lenders demanding immediate payment. His phone beeped with creditors, his voicemail filled with warnings. He had planned to trade my life for quick cash, and instead his lies had been exposed on every front, legal, financial, and moral. The law moved slowly, but when it did, it moved with weight. Emily tried to speak to me once, hands clasped, tears wet on her cheeks. "Dad," she said, voice tiny. I listened as she explained, as she admitted she'd trusted him, as she said the words, "I'm so sorry," that felt like shards of glass. I sat and let her speak, because letting her claw her way back was not my business to deny. Punishment had been served by reality. Repentance was something she had to earn. The shelter opened 3 months later with a small ceremony. Community leaders cut the ribbon while I stood quietly, Margaret's picture in my hand. The same reporter who'd been there from the start asked if I felt vindicated. I nodded, but the satisfaction was complicated, braided with loneliness and the memory of what had been lost. Ryan's name appeared in a small column in the local paper. Investigation ongoing. Local man faces charges. He had lost more than property. He'd lost the future he'd tried to buy with deception. The final twist was quieter than the rest. A neighbor, the one who'd once avoided me, came by with a box of old photos. She said, "We remember." Inside were pictures of Emily as a child, of Margaret laughing at a picnic, of me teaching Emily to ride a bike. Those reminders of small joy felt like balm. They also served as witnesses to the truth, little proofs that a life built on love cannot be erased by a single cruel act. In the end, the law had its day, and the court's order sealed the trust irrevocably. Ryan faced civil suits and a criminal inquiry for attempted forgery and fraud. He lost standing in two. The town he'd tried to hustle into believing him. Emily had to reckon with what she'd done. She began, haltingly, to volunteer at the shelter, perhaps to make amends, or perhaps to find herself again. Justice didn't erase the nights I slept alone. It didn't bring Margaret back. But it did right the most immediate wrong. It stopped them from profiting off my life and turned what could have been a theft into a legacy that would help others. When I watched Ryan being driven away, his shame visible even from the courthouse steps, I didn't feel triumphant so much as relieved. The truth had claws. It dug in and would not let go. I had not sought to ruin a life for the joy of it. I sought to make them feel the consequence of their choice. They had preferred convenience. I had chosen consequence. That night, I sat on the porch and didn't imagine revenge anymore. I let the quiet be something gentler. The knowledge that I had acted, that I had not folded, that I had protected what Margaret and I had built. They were exposed. They were punished in ways that mattered. In law, in reputation, in the slow, grinding weight of accountability. And as I closed the door, I understood. Revenge had been a tool to reclaim myself, but the real victory was in turning pain into something that could shelter others. When the dust finally settled, silence became my closest companion again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. The house was quiet, filled with the same creaks and sighs it always had, yet something inside me had shifted. The bitterness that once clung to me like smoke was fading, replaced by a calm that I hadn't felt in years. Each morning, I brewed my coffee and watched the sun crawl over the garden Margaret used to tend. The flowers she planted, lilies her favorite, had somehow bloomed brighter that season. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was her way of telling me I'd done the right thing. I didn't celebrate Ryan's downfall. I didn't smile when I heard he'd lost everything, his job, his standing, his easy lies. Instead, I felt a quiet kind of sorrow, because revenue, no matter how just, always comes with a price. Emily started visiting again, slowly, carefully, like a child approaching a wounded animal. She'd bring groceries, or sometimes just sit on the porch without saying much. One evening she said softly, "Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked at her, my only daughter, the girl I'd raised with everything I had. And I told her, "Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Emily. It's something you live up to." There were nights I'd still wake up thinking of the text. "You're not coming with us." Those words had sliced me open once. Now they were just a scar, a reminder of what blind trust can cost, but also of how strength is born from breaking. The house, once meant to be sold, had become a place of refuge. Every week people came, old folks with no family, widows with nowhere to go, a veteran who needed a bed for the winter. They didn't know the story behind the walls, but they could feel something here. Peace, perhaps, or redemption. Sometimes I'd sit among them, listening to their stories, and realize that my revenge had turned into something far greater than payback. It had become protection, not just for me, but for others who'd been forgotten, cast aside, told they weren't coming. The shelter carried Margaret's name now, carved into a small wooden plaque by the door, the Lily House. Every time someone read it, I felt her spirit linger nearby, patient, proud, forgiving. Emily now helps run the place. She cooks meals, tends the garden, and never speaks of Ryan. Her eyes carry regret, yes, but also resolve, the kind that only comes from losing everything and learning what truly matters. She doesn't ask for my blessing. She earns it, little by little, with every kind act she gives back to the world. One afternoon, a volunteer asked me if I regretted what I'd done, exposing them, fighting back, turning the house into something new. I thought about it for a long moment, feeling the sun on my face. Then I said, "Regret? No. Because revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about reminding them, and myself, that a man's dignity isn't something you can sell." As I grow older, I've learned that justice and peace don't always live in the same place. But sometimes, if you're patient enough, they meet halfway. My revenge began with rage, but it ended with rebuilding. It turned loss into legacy, betrayal into purpose. That's the funny thing about revenge. If you do it right, it doesn't destroy you. It restores you. Now, when people pass by and see the warm lights glowing in the Lily House, they don't see an old man who was left behind. They see a survivor, a father who refused to let greed write his story's ending. And maybe that's the moral I want to leave behind. Don't let betrayal define you. Let it refine you. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living so well that those who left you behind can never reach the peace you found.